Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. The topic for today is AI, user experience, and the Gen Z journey, evolving patterns for the next generation of search. This is a talk that we originally gave at the Digital Collegium conference in September, and we've updated and expanded it and shifted the focus a little bit to more on the user experience side. So really excited to be here today with my colleagues, Chloe and Joel. My name's Bill McLaughlin. I'm the Executive Vice President for Web Solutions at Carnegie. I've been working in higher ed web since 2007 and based in the Midwest in St. Louis, Missouri. And I'll pass it to Chloe to say hello.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chloe Solani, and I am a strategy consultant at Squiz. I'm currently based everywhere, so I work with clients around the globe and spend a lot of time thinking around how they might be able to better increase revenue through their digital channels, and on the flip side, how they might be able to reduce cost as well. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of our insights with you today.
And my name is Joel Goodman. I am the VP of Growth Strategy at Squiz. I've been working in higher education since 2007. I think it's 2007. It's been a long time. I've known Bill for a long time. I work I've worked across a lot of website redesigns, website strategy. I've done a lot of research, and now I'm working at Squiz, helping connect our products in with the higher education industry. So, Bill, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm jealous of your microphone.
I'll send you one.
Well,
I think I have an old one somewhere, man.
I bet. I'm just using good old-fashioned laptop audio, so hopefully it's coming through okay. All right, so we talked about the purpose, we talked about ourselves. Let's get into it. The agenda for today is pretty simple. It's in 4 parts. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's changing in terms of digital discovery. A lot of these things I think are things that people are thinking about a lot these days and are aware of, but we'll share some information and talk about kind of where things are heading. And then second part is around what this means for user experience. We're going to share some examples of some emerging user experience patterns and talk about, what conclusions we can draw from that. Content is a big part of this next generation of, AI-driven discovery and search. So we're going to talk about how to prepare your content so that you can be successful. And then we'll close with some ideas and thoughts on where you can go from here. Okay, the changing landscape of digital discovery. Not news to share this, but Squiz conducted a true intent study over the last year or so with a few different institutions and found that over 50% of users could not find the information they were looking for. This has been a challenge in higher ed web. Obviously, we were commenting in our prep work that Joel and I both feel like it's gotten better over time, but still, I think an issue where people can't find the information that they're seeking. And now we have AI entering the fold and a whole new way to find information. ChatGPT is now showing up in Ahrefs as one of the top referring domains. On a percentage basis, it's nowhere near Google at a fraction of 1% versus almost 42%. But the rate of growth with ChatGPT is it's growing at a rate of 3.8 times of Google. So it is a small but very significant change in the total amount of traffic and a huge change if you think about it in terms of growth. 850% increase year over year in AI originated organic traffic. And this is surveying all of Carnegie digital clients. So Carnegie does a lot of digital marketing services across the higher ed portfolio. And we surveyed our client base, and we're seeing significant increase in traffic origination from AI tools such as ChatGPT. We also aggregated a lot of news and articles that have been published in the last year or so. So this was some work that was conducted by a couple of folks who work at Carnegie. They looked at 49 different sources and surveys that are publicly available on the internet, and this covers about 20,000 students. And really kind of dug into, okay, if we aggregate all this content that's been published and we look at the information, what kind of trends are we seeing in terms of how students are using AI? So what couple things emerged from that. One, 23% of high school seniors use ChatGPT for college research this year in 2025, and that is up from 4% just 2 years ago. Prospective students are using these tools to search for information outside of your website. So looking for options, comparing colleges, asking questions. Um, I think everyone's sort of familiar with the zero click phenomenon where people are finding out a lot about you now without even coming to your site at all. Trust is layered. So people use these tools, but they don't necessarily trust what the answers that they're getting. And students are as savvy about this as anyone, so they know to talk with these AI tools to get quick answers to information, but they also still rely on other sources, especially when it's decisions or content that really matters to them. So that could be other people, it could be content that's on your website, it could be content on other websites. And I think probably the biggest takeaway from this work is that um, that kind of mapping this to the funnel. Students are more apt to use AI tools like ChatGPT and others at the top of the funnel when they're exploring their options. And as they get closer to making a decision, they do still rely heavily on first-party sources like your website to to kind of get to a place where they feel comfortable. Also, human conversations are really important. So, in other words, as the stakes get higher and the need for accuracy and high trust information gets higher, they're more likely to rely on traditional methods and traditional sources for their information. Looking ahead, obviously Gen Alpha is coming soon. Gen Alpha right now would be middle schoolers and early high schoolers, and their patterns and use of AI are actually even more significant than Gen Z. So, I think it's fair to say that Gen Z would likely treat AI as more of a search or research tool. Gen Alpha is using it as like a, a almost like a friend or an advisor. It's more of a collaborative tool for them, someone that they actually quote unquote would talk with or have a conversation with. And so I think what we expect to see is that top of funnel trend that I mentioned on the last slide for Gen Z is probably going to be a more pervasive. Gen Alpha will likely use these tools, up and down the funnel, and it'll be more of an sort of built into just the way that they operate and the way that they think about things. So institutions must be ready for this AI native audience and the changes that will come with the way that they will kind of approach their journey.
So what does this mean for UX? There's a lot going on as AI has come into the play, and we like to kind of look at this analogy. If you remember what it used to be like to watch cable television, or if you ever travel and get into a hotel room, you can still revisit what it was like to watch cable television. I was at the AMA Higher Ed Symposium recently, and it never ceases to amaze me. I get into a hotel room, I turn on the TV, and I still have to navigate through this long list of channels organized by some seemingly arbitrary channel numbering system, going through local channels, going through all the cable things, when all I really want to watch is diners, drive-ins, and dives inside my hotel room, right? Um, and so this was kind of pervasive for a really long time, and you still see it. But what's interesting is that as technologies like Netflix started coming on the scene, I remember the original Netflix, well, the Netflix after they were sending DVDs, because I also remember when Netflix sent DVDs to you. But when Netflix first launched their streaming service, they were gathering all this information about us, and they started really targeting their UX and targeting their content towards us in ways that are interesting. So we have this new experience within what is just everywhere now. Everyone learned from this. So whether you're watching cable, you're subscribing to cable TV, or whether you're just on streaming content everywhere, these places have millions and millions and millions of pieces of content, pieces of data out there, and they needed to find ways to surface that for us. And so these patterns that the companies like Netflix started pioneering back, I don't know, what was that, 15, 20 years ago. These are pervasive everywhere now. We see these all the time wherever we're at. However, what's interesting about that is that, again, we still haven't lost that list view that we get in our hotel rooms or when we're looking at other things. They're giving us options, and even though even though visitors to our websites are having trouble finding content, we're still giving them different options for the ways to do it. So AI comes in as a way to really help us figure out how to kind of organize this content and how to direct it towards people and help them navigate. But not everyone wants to just sit there and have a conversation. Some people still want to look through these our typical navigation structures and see how they work. So I want to give a little bit of a history lesson here, a navigation in higher ed. And Bill and I have seen this for years and years and years and years. There's kind of this typical starting point where we all did org charts. I mean, this was the 90s, maybe even earlier than that. But late 90s, we were doing org chart navigation where we were grouping it by the academics office and the admissions office and the financial aid office, and then abouts usually like kind of a junk drawer sort of a thing. Then we might have athletics, and there were probably three or four other things that we were trying to cram into our navigation menus. And then we would have this tiny little search icon over to the right, and would just kind of hide the search bar entirely. And then your typical design patterns are a big old hero image. I mean, it took a little while for that to show up on the scene in higher ed, but we've also seen that for 15 or 20 years at this point. Giant hero image, and then just some random content, including quick links, which again makes it very hard for you to find anything. It's just a list of random things and not very quick. And also content that you don't know that your users actually care about. It's a little bit more inward looking. Then we all started getting a little bit more smart about how we were doing this. We started considering conversion rate optimization. We started trying to consider our users and how they navigate. We did usability studies. We did all kinds of questioning around how people wanted to find content and what content that they wanted to find. And so we started modifying the ways that we were building our sites. And we still kept some of the same patterns, but we started modifying the navigation to be a little bit more user focused with things like, oh, they're calling them programs, maybe not just academics. And maybe cost and aid is more important than just a general term for financial aid someplace. And maybe student life has a better spot in this hierarchy. We still tended to hide the search, but we might pull up a sub search for program finders and program searches within our hero areas. And then we started thinking through content navigation, which essentially is taking what you have in your main menu and replicating it as sort of teasers through the rest of the content on your site in order to get people to navigate in another way. And not unlike what we're talking about with the advances in AI navigation, just a little bit old school because we don't have all the inference that we can get out of AI.
So what we're going to talk about next is some of the AI native user experience patterns that we're seeing. And I think one of the things that's most interesting for me, and Bill and I have been talking quite a lot about this, is the rate at which behavior is changing. So one thing I've always talked to different organizations about is that user behavior can be really, really hard to shift. Historically, it's taken, years, sometimes decades, for users to adopt new technology. My favorite example of that is always ATM machines at banks, which were released initially in like the 1960s, but took a number of decades before people trusted them and actually wanted to use a significantly more convenient method of banking. Now, the opposite is true with what we're seeing with AI. And the rate at which users are experiencing and expecting these assisted experiences where the cognitive effort is lower and the contextualization is a lot higher. And so what we've got here are three different patterns that we're most commonly seeing. The first pattern is around self-contained experiences. So that's where a user might come to a landing page and be presented with question and answer style driven landing pages, similar to what you might see with ChatGPT. I know I was recently looking for a master's degree. I did some research in ChatGPT. I landed on a website talking about a particular degree, but I actually wasn't on the university site. I didn't realize I was on a site that actually summarized all these different courses and provided an AI comparison. So that's sort of an example of this sort of all-in-one experience. The next experience is a more integrated or hybrid solution. And so that's where we're seeing the combination of things like traditional search results or traditional web pages with an overlaid question and answer style experience. I'm going to show you an example of that in a moment. And the last example is these much more user-driven concierge style experiences that actually provide answers and promote brand content in a very hyper-personalized way. And I'm really excited actually to go through some of the thinking that Joel's been doing on that after. But just over onto the next slide, I wanted to take you through an example of one of the hybrid experiences. So this website that you're seeing is from the University of Greenwich over in the United Kingdom. And what we're seeing on the screen is a user has performed a search on the site. So they've typed in, what sort of facilities do you have on campus? And in addition to the search results, that kind of traditional list of blue links that appear, an AI overview is being generated to provide a contextual answer only referencing this organization's content. And actually, it's only addressing and answering based on very specific pieces of content that Greenwich has vetted and made available to provide this more summarized example. When we go over onto the next slide, we'll start to see that there's also ways that we can start to add different call to actions to this experience as well. So in addition to providing that ChatGPT style example where I can answer questions, ask follow-up questions, we can also then direct users down different pathways depending on the types of comments that come up. So this particular user has commented, how do I actually book an open day? And from there, we can actually take them through a sign-up journey with a form, but we can also direct them off to deeper content pages. There's just one thing I just want to mention on this that's really important. We hear a lot about like governance, like how does an organization actually feel comfortable letting technology like this loose on their websites? We've all seen those horror stories, or sometimes they're quite humorous stories of chatbots that have gone rogue and they're writing poetry or slamming the organization. And as I say this, I mentioned before that I live everywhere, and I'm not sure if you can hear the smoke alarm going off. I'm in a hotel that's doing repetitive smoke alarm testing. It may or may not stop. I'm gonna go on mute for 1 second. And
Let's go. Let's move ahead to Monash.
All right. So as we're thinking through some of how AI can change the ways that we're doing UX across our site, at Squiz we've been experimenting with a few different things. You saw Chloe's examples of kind of that full AI summary search with some calls to action in it. But we started thinking, like, what if we take that another step further? How could we use it to have more of a guided journey within what we're doing? And so we put together a proof of concept and have worked with a couple of our customers to come up with this way of using AI and how we use a page. So it's search, but it's also kind of not search, or it's kind of maybe somewhat the future of search that we have here today. Being able to have someone ask a question, actually encourage them to use the large language model behind here to have a conversation while also updating content around it contextually. So as they're searching, we're able to not just lose some of this data in, well, we're not just putting this data in a summary that they can lose later on as they're going through this journey, but we're pulling up certain pieces and putting them within the interface of the website. So in that same kind of example of someone searching through an open day and how to get it, instead of just saying, hey, here's an open day, this is the date, this is the time, we can pull up a card on our page and within our user experience to remind them that. So as they're still drilling down and asking more questions, they're able to continue to ask more and get more context and learn more about it. It's kind of a next step towards personalization. But as we're working on this sort of a thing, I start to question, like, what is the actual future of what we can do with all of these technologies when we're thinking about the data that we have about our website visitors, how they use our website, what they're clicking on, what we have in our CRMs, and then how can we tie that back to a search index that we might have of all the content on our website, and then pass that through a large language model and let AI really help us design new user experiences within this. In the same way that we were talking about the Netflix sort of algorithm generated recommendations for content. How do we start to do that with people on our actual websites? And rather than just give them something to be entertained with, help guide them through a journey to those actions that we want them to take. So I've kind of been thinking about this in a few different ways, and we can go back to that wireframe that we showed earlier. And some of the things stay the same. Like maybe the navigation is still there because it does work. But how do we bring that AI search experience front and center and then use it to modify some of these actions that we want people to take and modify the content that we're showing them? And especially in higher education, we talk about needing to do personalization all the time. It's like the number one thing that people talk about. And now we have this AI thing, and AI is something that we have to do. And so now we have these two really big priorities that we have to kind of try to track down how to do things with. And I think they actually work together in really interesting ways and help us think in terms of what our users want, and then help open us up to what the future could be. So within this flowchart that's here, essentially the flow is, someone searches within your search bar. I've in this mock-up, I've kind of pulled out that search bar right into the, right front and center inside the hero image. And then when that search query goes through, it hits your search index that, whatever your search engine is, gone through, pulled everything together. You have all this data already organized, already contextualized with a lot of metadata associated with it. And then if you take that data and you pass it into your large language model, your AI model, and you combine that with any customer data platform data you might have, or any CRM data you might have, or maybe it's your, maybe it's your student information system going through it, whatever those pieces are. And then you use that LLM to take that back into your search index and then enable the UX on your page, the different components within your website or within your web page to be updatable by that LLM. You start to get to a point where you can really personalize that page on the fly for the person that's there based on what they're typing into that search box, based on any other data that you have. And it could be pulling a video out of the index that you have, out of the content that you have online and on your website, and putting that on the page. It could be editing a list of programs that you have in there and suggesting things that fit what you know and what they're searching for. And it could be, instead of just sending people directly to an admissions page or admissions RFI, it could be directing them directly to financial aid because they're a little bit further down the path than a typical top of funnel prospective student. Could be filling in their name and their email address because you have that information already. And these are the things that really excite me about AI and AI connected to search within our websites. It opens up an entirely new kind of frontier of what we can do with our websites, while keeping it grounded in the content and data that we have and the strategies that we have in higher education.
Cool. So we wanted to actually test. So we ran an user usability test against the University of Greenwich example that Chloe talked about a few minutes ago. And what we did is we had one group of users only use traditional navigation, and then a second group use the conversational AI tool to try to find information. And we gave them obviously the same tasks, the same information, the same asks to try to get the information that we asked them to find. The findings are really interesting. What came out of this study was that people in the navigation group were actually able to find information faster if the menus were clear and they were able to associate the task at hand with the way that the navigation was labeled. Um, Conversely, conversational AI worked better and filled the gaps more when the nav was unclear. So if the task that they were asked to perform wasn't immediately obvious in terms of where it was in the navigation, the people who used conversational AI to find that information got there more quickly than those who had to try to kind of hunt and find the information using the traditional navigation construct. The other thing that was interesting is we kind of thought that the back and forth that's available within the conversational AI, it was something that would help people get to the information that they're looking for. But what we found in this study was that people often got what they needed in one shot and didn't have to go through multiple rounds of question and answer with the conversational AI. So that leads us to the third section of the presentation around preparing your content. And we thought the place to start here is an example. And obviously, if you have bad content and these AI tools are searching your site to provide answers, and the content that's been input into their models is not good, that can be a really significant issue. So this is again with the Greenwich example. One of the questions that um, surfaced was someone used the tool and asked, "Where is a quiet space to study on campus?" And the answer that they were provided was a pub, actually, not too far from campus. And the reason why that was provided, it was because there was a quiet space within the pub, and it was thought to be a place where someone could go with a small group of friends and have a quiet conversation. This wasn't content that was actually in the kind of within the boundary of the content that had been fed into the tool, but it was linked off of one of the pages that had been fed into the tool. And so it did make its way into the question and answer experience. And it's sort of a just a reminder of the importance of making sure that the content that you feed in is good. So we did that, in the Greenwich example, this was caught and adjusted. And Chloe, if she's not still battling beeping, can probably speak to the multiple layers of um, what is audited via AI and what is audited via human intervention, and how those two things combined in this particular situation.
I actually am not still battling the beeping. I'm nervous that it might come back, but after a solid 10 minutes, it's finally decided to hold off for a minute. Anyone seen that episode of Friends with Phoebe and the fire alarm where she honestly, like, literally loses her mind? That's kind of where I'm close to. But yeah, totally. So the auditing framework for Greenwich was really interesting. And the example that Bill's mentioned, I think really speaks to this as well. So what we found with the AI tools is that they're exceptionally strong at them again to any pages you want them to look at. And what we typically do with the auditing process is we pose a series of questions to the content. And there's some really great audit logs so we can actually see what is the exact question that was asked, what is the answer that was generated, and which pages of content were used to provide that answer. And we can actually go down to what we call the fragment level. So that is the specific piece of content on each page that's being used to generate this answer. And so the example that Bill used around a pub being a quiet place to study on campus, we actually picked that up with our AI tools. That was something that the AI was horizontally crawling a link to an internal knowledge center that was just on one page, and to manually find that link would have taken an extraordinary amount of time. So by asking the question, by looking at the auditing, we're able to do that. And then we put the human layer over the top of that to look at, well, why is this happening? The AI can tell us if there might be duplicate content or where pieces of content might be conflicting with ourselves, but there's a human element to that as well. One thing I also just want to mention with the auditor and with the way that the technology generates answers is that there's two layers of AI working in tandem. So one piece of AI is taking the user's question and then converting that into something that we can cross-reference with our content. The other piece of AI, we call it our guardian agent, is actually checking to make sure that the answer that's being generated is based on only the pieces of content that we've denoted we want it to look at, and that there's no hallucination going on, that it's following all of the prompts that have been set. And if it passes that faithfulness check, we'll promote the answer to the user. If it doesn't pass for some reason, if something has gone wrong with what's being generated, it won't present an answer and will fall back to a customized error message. And Bill, I can go on and on about Greenwich, but we can save that for later if anybody wants to reach out with any questions.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and credit to Chloe for finding this. If we think about, what can you do as a higher ed marketing communications web professional in terms of content? What we see here is an example of how the Golden Gate Bridge is maintained in terms of the how it's painted, and this is instructive and informative as a model for how you might think about keeping your content up to date. So what they do with the Golden Gate Bridge, you can actually find this. There's been some television programs and I think there's some YouTube videos on this, is that they are constantly in a mode of spot patching or spot repairing sites within the bridge that need care in terms of paint. So they're constantly identifying, they have a backlog, if you will, a list of areas on the bridge that need attention, and they're basically prioritizing that list and attacking that top priority items as they go. This is in contrast to sort of like, I guess you could think of it as a more traditional way of doing things. So when we were at the conference, the Digital Collegium conference in September, I shared the story of I used to work for CNA Insurance in downtown Chicago, and at the time, they were based in a building that was pretty similar in color to the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was a 35-story building, and they had a team of people that washed the windows. And there was a scaffolding that dropped down from the roof of the building, and it was on a track. And so they could position the scaffolding wherever, and the scaffolding would basically just move up and down vertically in that section of on that side of the building. It was a very simple architecture. It was a rectangle, and so the scaffolding would work its way around the building, and the window washers would move up and down. And the building was big enough that by the time they finished a complete round around the building, it was time to start over again. And so essentially, this crew was washing windows all the time. They weren't thinking about, which floor the executives were on or where there was dirt or grime or, animal activity like bird activity outside the windows. They were just going through and they had a kind of a path through to do that. And so that would be the opposite. Um, our belief is that the Golden Gate Bridge way is the way to go with web content, and specifically to focus on the top priorities of your site. What is the content that drives the most traffic or supports student decisions and or builds trust with those primary audiences? And then look for outdated information or weak structure or confusing signals, potentially redundant or inconsistent information, and focus on those areas first. So how can you make those patches or adjustments to make the content clearer, more accurate, and perform better, monitoring how you do as you go, as people are interacting and as AI tools are interacting with your content, doing some baselining so you can test the effectiveness before and after the changes. So, um, it's very common, obviously, in higher ed for there to be a lot more content than the central team can get their arms around. And I actually think, while not on topic for today's presentation, I think AI is going to be an interesting enabler for teams to get their arms around a greater amount of the content than they've historically been able to. But still, the reality is, if you and your team went in the CNA window washing model, you might go for 5 or 10 years before you got through everything, and then you'd be behind, honestly, to get started the second go around. So this Golden Gateway is definitely the way to go in terms of being in a constant mode of prioritizing what's most important and focusing your attention there.
And Bill, can I just mention something? I think there's one other thing I love about this method, and a lot of the work that I've been doing lately has been working with different higher ed institutions to help them get more funding and resourcing for their web teams. Web teams are like notoriously under-resourced and underfunded. There's a really small group of people that are, to Bill's point, trying to wrap their arms around an astronomical amount of business content. And when we take the Golden Gate Bridge sort of maintenance analogy, what you're able to really have is the data to say, well, if we're going to fix this topic or this piece of content, which can drive this much value for our organization, we're going to need 2 to 3 people to spend, 1 to 2 months doing 1, 2, and 3. And it's a really, we can really quantify the effort and the business benefit of investing in our infrastructure. Whereas when we take the waterfall window washing analogy, somebody might go, hey, we've got a team of 5 window washers, and we've got funding cuts. We think we can do it with 4. It's really difficult to convey what the impact of that might be, and can we do it with 4? Can we not? So actually, just getting this baseline auditing done and having an idea of how well the content is performing I think one of the things I didn't mention before speaking about the AI auditing analogy is there's a great sort of tool that we have access to where when we're auditing content, we can actually see how much of the content across our site or across our topic, how much of it is actually being used by AI to generate answers. Often what we find, there's some sections of websites often that just aren't actually providing answers to questions. So the AI just totally skips over it when it comes to using it to provide answers. And very small tweaks to those pieces of content can actually make a world of difference in making your information and your brand a lot more discoverable, which we actually go into a little bit on our checklist on the next slide. Awesome. Bill, do you want to kick us off or do you want me to dive in?
Sure. So we're getting toward the end here, and I think, what we want to do here is talk about situations where people might have the energy, interest, enthusiasm, and time on their hands to try to tackle some of the content adjustments that we've been talking about today themselves. And so, we put together this checklist as a way to help in that situation. So, I think, Chloe, you want to talk about the first few, and then I'll take the last few.
Yeah, sure thing. So, step one for me is always around understanding user intent. What do people actually need to come to our website to do to find? What questions do they have? What tasks do they need to complete? There's a lot of great ways you can understand user intent. You can ask AI to generate a bunch of questions based on different usability studies that it has access to from crawling the web around common things prospective students might be seeking and might need to do. You can also look at your search data and see what information what you're seeing from the searches performed in your search bar. And you can also run a true intent study, which we referenced some of the outputs from before, which is just, again, a great way to baseline what are the questions that people have and how easily are they able to find them. Once we've done that, the next part's around removing AI confusion factors. There's a bunch of known things that can make it really difficult for AI to provide answers from your content. So having information that's 10 years old is incorrect, not up to date. Having a lot of organizational specific jargon, broken links, some sort of technical SEO factors as well. Just getting the basics right really provides a lot of improvement there. And I think what I love about this item is that improving it here improves things across the board, right? So by making things easier for the AI to digest, we're having all of these knock-on effects in terms of accessibility, in terms of just general search engine optimization as well. And then we want to audit that sort of content quality. So by taking then a more structured approach of mapping those user questions to specific pages of content, to specific URLs. And again, there's different ways that AI tools can make that a lot easier and can support you to do a lot greater volume of auditing in a shorter period of time. It's really important. And Bill, I think you're going to take these last few.
Yeah, the last few. So the next one is around providing structure for clear answers. So in a way, this is kind of a different way to think about a content model or a content flow for key pages. So front loading the page with some of the facts and figures, or putting those in a place that is prominent, like potentially a call out box. Things like dates or infographics or statistics. Those are things that the LLMs will pick up on and will ingest in a way that's different from just sort of narrative language. So putting that stuff up front and then following that up with supporting context and narrative detail is a good way to go in terms of how to structure your content. There's obviously a lot of technical things that can be done in terms of, I think of these as sort of like things that over the years, in the last few years, for sure, we've thought of as like technical SEO. So having accurate schema markup, leveraging schema markup potentially, having good metadata, so page titles and meta descriptions, things that would improve your SEO are also going to improve discoverability with the AI tools. They're also going to improve your accessibility, which is obviously an important topic in higher ed and just in general in the web space. And then last but not least, governance. So, this could be applicable to any kind of content governance, but really just making sure that when you think about who is responsible and has accountability for updating content throughout different sections of your website, pairing people who know the subject matter with people that understand more of the AI implications of how AI is going to interact with your content, and then creating feedback loops so that you can get insights via some of the auditing that Chloe was talking about at the beginning, and factoring that into your review cycles. So making sure that you have the right mix of subject matter expertise and technical expertise is an important thing from a governance perspective. And then also wanted to mention that we have a discoverability assessment. This is a relatively new assessment that we've come out with in the last couple of months. And this would be something that I think we would encourage people to check out if they're more they don't have the availability to take on the checklist that we shared on the previous slide. So we're using a tool called Profound to deliver this checklist. And what we're doing is combining scans that come out of the tool with analysis provided by people on our team. And what comes out of the assessment is a like very practical advice and recommendations and a plan of action that's prioritized. So again, we're using a tool called Profound to do a site-wide scan. We're testing prompts to evaluate real-world discoverability of your content. People on the team would review high-impact pages, the navigation and the structure of those pages, and then we would identify places where schema markup might be of benefit. So if you're interested in this, feel free to reach out. Love to walk through it, explain it, and see if it's a fit. Okay. So, kind of bringing this in for a landing, what have we learned? So, um, going back to some of the earlier slides, we've learned that frictionless access to answers is what wins, and that's true of any generation, frankly, but certainly more and more as we move from Gen Z to Gen Alpha. We also learned that AI-based searching is helpful if the content is accurate and well structured, but on-site navigation is still relevant. So think of the two working in harmony together. They both have a role to play in a more integrated user experience. And Gen Alpha is coming, and they're coming soon, and they're going to expect AI native experiences across a broader array and up and down the funnel, if you will. I think one of the things that I've learned personally in this experience and working with Chloe and Joel on bringing this content together and looking at the resources that we aggregated and some of the data, there was a moment probably, I don't know, 6 or 9 months ago where I was starting to worry that the website as we know it might become extinct. And I think this has proven to me that that is not the case. So the form and function of websites is going to continue to evolve, but they still remain the most trusted place for deeper engagement, research, and decision making. And I think as we move into the future, um, there's still a role for that. There's also still a role, frankly, for a branded user experience that you can provide via your own website that, at least until this point and for the foreseeable future, the LLMs and AI tools are not able to provide that. So bringing it all back to the original analogy that Joel talked us through, we're sort of thinking of this as the Roku remote, where you can kind of get access to both ways of discovering in a single integrated user experience. Joel and Chloe, any closing thoughts before we wrap things up?
I think when it comes to the Roku remote here, like this is kind of a transitionary period, right? And we're still learning some of this stuff. The AI is still changing constantly. Like this whole technology is still really new. And so I think it's important, going back to your point, like UX is going to change. Like these approaches are going to change. But we do have ways to really start looking at this now. It's never too early to start really thinking about how you communicate your content to your actual users. And so running these true intent studies, looking at your content, looking at having an AI readiness or discoverability kind of assessment done. Those are all things that are going to help you think through this transition period. And that only sets you up better for the future in terms of being ready as new UX patterns emerge, new ways of finding content emerge for Gen Alpha, but whatever generations come after that, however they decide to name it, right? Whatever generations come after that. So it's just important to be ready and to be actively looking and learning about this stuff.
And the only thing I want to mention is like with the example of this sort of magical Netflix button that can give us a different experience. What I love about what I love about all of this is that you can really easily test, measure, and learn on something small. So again, ring fence an idea, ring fence a section of content, and we're not talking sort of years and years or months and months to get answers. The example that we showed with Greenwich, that was something that was live in under 2 months. So by focusing on the right area, we're able to, again, set a set of business metrics that we want to measure and drive to in terms of our engagement and conversions, etc. But you can start really small and then decide, how many types of experiences like this do we need, or do we actually want to think about a much more immersive experience like the examples that Joel walked through. So it's a really great starting point, and capturing that data from the get-go.
Awesome. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's presentation. I really want to thank Joel and Chloe. It was fun working on this with you all, and really hope this was helpful to everybody. Helps to think about where things are going and know that the thing that we've spent years and years working on is not going away. It's just evolving and changing. And look forward to catching up in the future. Thanks so much.